Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem, here in beautiful Holy Land of Israel. Today is the 12th day of the month of Nisan 5786. It's the 30th day of March 2026. And of course, we are quickly approaching the Chag HaChirut, Festival of Freedom, Passover, known in Hebrew as Pesach. Passover, the houses of the Hebrew slaves in Egypt who had the omits, had the courage to defy the Egyptians and slaughter lambs and paint their doorposts with the blood of the lamb, so that the angel that Hashem sent forth that evening on the 15th of Nisan would see the paint, the blood that painted their lintels and doorposts, and say, they're getting out of here, and pass over them. Passover. But of course, God didn't need to see the blood on the lintels in order to know who was with Hashem, who had the courage to leave Egypt. We needed to know. We who wanted to get out of Egypt needed to show ourselves that we had that courage. We needed to prove to ourselves. And as I've pointed out before, all the miracles, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, all of that, it couldn't have brought us freedom if we hadn't acted on our own behalf. And that act, of course, was the fulfillment of God's second commandment to Israel while still in Egypt, and that was to go out on the 10th of the month, which this year happened to be on a Shabbat. It was on a Shabbat also in Egypt. Go out and acquire a lamb that you'll slaughter on the 14th. And of course, the lamb was considered a sacred animal in Egypt. And you didn't just go around slaughtering it. And so when the Egyptians saw their lowly slave population going out and acquiring en masse, acquiring lambs, they said, "What's going on? What are you doing?" And they say, "We're going to slaughter this lamb." And that took courage. It took courage to say that to the Egyptians, who could have slaughtered them right there. They could have slaughtered them. They could have beaten them and made them work harder. So it took tremendous courage, and that's what Hashem was looking for. You need courage. Freedom requires courage. We're going to be talking a lot about freedom in today's Temple Talk, which I'm recording on a Monday as opposed to my usual Tuesday, because time is of the essence right now as we're getting close to Passover. There's a lot of preparations, and this year there's a lot of interruptions as well, because Iran keeps on firing ballistic missiles into Israel. And in fact, I think since yesterday evening, I have been in the neighborhood bomb shelter 4 times, maybe 5 times. We get a warning. Everybody gets a warning on their phone, on their cell phone, and that gives you a number of minutes to get into a protected area, whether it's a mamad, which is a personal in-your-house safe room, or a public miklat, which is a bomb shelter, which is what I go to. And there you wait it out, and you need to wait it out a bit, because I think we've shown some things, we've shown some photos, and maybe you've seen other photos online of massive, huge debris after a rocket's been. Our anti-missile systems are very successful in shooting down these rockets, but they don't just evaporate in thin air. The pieces from the rockets fall to the ground, and some of them are massive, and they can cause tremendous damage, and of course they can be fatal. So you need to stay in the protected area for a number of minutes after the missile has been shot down, before you can go out, because it could be fatal. And in fact, in many videos, you see a huge piece coming down and crushing a car or something. And it was, you see, like 5 minutes earlier, the person got out of the car and went to the safe room, saved their lives. Anyway, so yes, we're very busy right now. Excuse me, and that's why I'm recording today. Not that it really matters to anybody but me. But before we talk about freedom, I just want to mention one thing that I learned this past Shabbat. This past Shabbat, was Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Shabbat. It's the Shabbat that precedes Passover, and we posted an article last week on Facebook and on our website about the significance of Shabbat HaGadol. But one thing I wanted to mention now, something I learned on Shabbat. On Shabbat we read the Haftarah reading that we read, the special prophetic reading we read on Shabbat HaGadol is from Malachi, the last of the Hebrew prophets, whose prophecy was at the beginning of the Second Temple period. And he says something, and basically the Haftarah reading is from chapter 3 from Malachi, the final chapter, and we read in verse 4, and the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasant to Hashem as in the days of old and former years. Now in Hebrew it goes like this: V'arava la Hashem minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim ki me'olam uchshalim kadmoniot. The word used for offering is not just a generic term offering, it's the word mincha. Mincha is a specific offering. It's an offering that we've read about for the past 2 weeks, both in Parshat Vayikra, which we read 2 weeks ago, and Parshat Shmini. It's also mentioned, Parshat Tzav, which we mentioned last week. We also read about the mincha offering. What is the mincha offering? It's a handful of solet. It's a handful of seminola grain. And there's many offerings. There's bulls, there's goats, there's rams, there's sheep, there's birds, there's so many offerings. And the mincha offering is designated especially for someone who can't afford to bring a bull or a ram or a lamb. They don't have the means. All they can bring is a handful of solet, a handful of grain, a handful of wheat, basically. And this is for someone who's, this is what they've got. This is what they've got. And maybe they even had to, scrounge around to get the money to be able to purchase a handful of grain. Well, let's look at what it says in back in Parshat Vayikra, where it mentions all different types of offerings. But when it mentions the mincha, it says this. In Hebrew, it's if a person brings a grain offering to Hashem, his offering must be of fine flour. He must pour oil over it and place frankincense upon it. In Hebrew, it goes like this: V'nefesh ki takriv korban mincha l'Hashem, solat yeh korbano v'yatzek alav shemen v'natan alea levona. I'm going to say those first few words again. V'nefesh ki takriv korban mincha l'Hashem. It says nefesh. Nefesh means soul. It's the only time that word nefesh is used in referring to someone who's making an offering. Other words are used on a person, an ish, adam. This time it's nefesh, it's soul. Why is it soul? Because this is a person that, this is all they've got. They're giving of everything they've got. They're giving from their soul. This is it. There's no play here. There's no room for error here. A person who can afford a ram, they bring their offering, and God willing, they bring it with complete sincerity and integrity and intention, but they can afford it. It's not going to break them. But this person, this is it. This is what they've got. This is all they've got. This is them. This is their nefesh. This is their soul. And so when we read in Malachi that Hashem is looking forward to the future, when again we'll be able to bring our mincha offering, just as in the days of old. Basically he's saying Hashem's looking forward to that sincerity, for that giving of all that we've got. Now, we read many times in many of the prophets, that God doesn't need our offerings, he despises our offerings. The reason that the prophets say that in God's name is because God despises our offerings when they're not sincere, when they're meaningless, when we're not being good to one another, when we're mistreating one another, when we're cheating one another, when we're being cruel to one another, when we're not fulfilling our commitments to Hashem or to one another. Then bringing an offering is completely meaningless. We're not in the business of bribing Hashem. He's not in the business of taking bribes. He doesn't need our offerings. Our offerings are for ourselves, and that's why the mincha offering is so important to Hashem, because it's all for it's the entire person that is bringing that offering. That's the most important thing to Hashem, that it's coming from us, that it's coming from our hearts, coming from our soul, that it's everything to us. And that's the reach nichoach, that's the pleasing aroma that Hashem gets, that Hashem satisfies, gets satisfaction from, as it were, from our offerings, because it changes us. It changes who we are for the better. That's the satisfaction. That's the beauty of the offering. That's what Hashem wants. That's why we have offerings. I just thought that was a very beautiful, meaningful teaching. Let's talk a bit about freedom. Freedom is something that, if you have it, you take advantage of it, and you may also take it for granted, and you don't always appreciate it. If you don't have the freedom, well, you long for it, and you want it, and you're willing to do anything for it. We see this, of course, today. Many people in the West have forgotten what freedom's all about, and that freedom is not simply, a gift that you get for free. Freedom you have to earn. Freedom you have to work for. Freedom you have to pay for. And, if you're an American and, you were brought up, at least when I was growing up in America, we were brought up on the tradition of that America meant freedom, that it fought for freedom, that it aspired toward freedom. People can say, what about this, what about that? Yes, America's not a perfect country. No country is. But the freedoms and that are in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, those are aspirational. Those are things that a nation, that a people longs for and aspires to. They don't always achieve. That's not the subject of this conversation. Freedom is very important, and freedom is what Judaism, is what the Torah is all about. All about. And you might say, well, wait a minute. You guys got so many obligations, so many things you have to do, so many mitzvot, so many commandments. Well, those commandments, those mitzvot, which are often translated, almost always translated into English as commandment, as if someone's telling you have to do it. You have to do that, no choice. You always have a choice. Everything about Judaism is choice. Man was created, put in the Garden of Eden. God said don't do it, but he had a choice, and he chose to do it. He chose to eat what he was told not to eat. That's choice, and we've never lost that choice. And so these 613 commandments are actually 613 what some of our greatest sages have referred to as etzot, meaning suggestions. Things that, if you want to live a good life, if you want to get the most out of life, if you want to get the most out of yourself, these are things that the Torah recommends that you do. And that's precisely what they are there. And also they are connections to Hashem, and they can be connections to one another as well. That's what the commandments are, these 613 obligations. Everybody has the choice. If we didn't have the choice, they wouldn't be commandments. We have the choice to do or not to do. Unfortunately today, we don't have the choice of doing all 613 because sans the temple, and without the temple, hundreds of those commandments are not applicable today. God willing, we'll build a temple and we'll have greater choice in life to choose to do those commandments. Again, just getting back for a moment to the idea of an offering. If an offering were a commandment that you had to do, there would be no meaning in it. Offering is a commandment that you can choose to do if you want to fulfill it and get something out of it. So freedom is at the heart of the Torah. It's the heart of the Jewish experience. And of course, Passover is all about freedom. It's about our gaining our freedom. And it's about basically a people teaming up with Hashem to get that freedom. We read about the 10 plagues, how they devastated Egypt, and we read about how when Israel left, after following the commandment to register the new moon as the new month and to get a lamb on the 10th, and to slaughter the lambs on the 14th, and then to sit and eat that lamb with matzot on the eve of the 15th, and then to leave Egypt. And then, of course, the next crisis, God saved us by splitting the sea. And time after time, God rescued his people in the wilderness. And, a very casual, superficial reading will say, okay, God did everything. These people, I don't know, they're spoiled, they're privileged. But as I mentioned before, when Israel went out and got those lambs and slaughtered them, knowing that it could mean their death, because what they were doing was committing heresy in the eyes of the Egyptians, who still were in control, that took courage. They had to overcome their fear, which is what courage is, in order to do that. And by doing it, they basically earned their own freedom. God made it happen, but they earned it. And that's why God sent them out on that mission. Again, they had a choice. And in fact, unfortunately, tradition holds that only 1 out of 5 Israelites in Egypt actually performed the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering that year, and got out of Egypt. 4/5 of the Jews in Egypt never got out. What happened to them? Who knows? They assimilated. They disappeared. So yes, not everybody got out. Again, this is, you won't find this written in the Torah. This is written in the oral Torah. This is our tradition, but it points out that not everybody had the courage. Not everybody had belief in themselves, in Hashem, or in Moshe as Hashem's prophet. And belief is courage. If you believe in Hashem and you believe in yourself, that's what courage is all about. And that's what the Israelites, the Hebrew slaves, proved to Hashem. And that was basically their ticket out of Egypt. Once they did that, they're out of there. And even though, as we know, they had many, many falls, many failings along the way in the wilderness. In fact, a 1-year journey from Egypt to the land of Canaan ended up taking 40 years because of all their mistakes and mishaps. But basically, they proved that in their DNA is the courage to take a chance on freedom. And freedom's a chance, because once you have it, it's a tricky thing. But once you have it, you need to cherish it and never take it for granted. But it's a tricky thing. It's very interesting. Today, in the world, we're seeing something which I know I'm not alone in seeing so many parallels and so many hints to our own story of leaving Egypt, of the Exodus. And I'm referring, of course, to Iran. And we know that the people of Iran, a few months ago, exhibited in tremendous courage, rising up and filling the streets. Unfortunately, they were gunned down by the tens of thousands. And, of course, Donald Trump said, help is on the way, and eventually help arrived. And Israel and the United States now are basically visiting plagues upon Iran. And again, don't get me wrong, Israel and America, Trump and Netanyahu, they're not playing God. But God works behind the scenes, let's put it that way. And right now, Israel and America are visiting plagues upon Iran. In fact, Iran, the Iranian government visited their own plagues, just like Pharaoh, sometimes in order to imitate, to show Moshe that, your God's not so strong. My own advisors, my own magicians can do the same. They have the Iranian regime has long ago destroyed the Iranian water supply. They have to ration water because they have caused horrible environmental destruction, and many rivers and lakes and reservoirs have dried up. Tremendous pollution from some of the things that they're producing for the purpose of war that are killing, suffocating Iranians, especially in Tehran. A electricity. They've had problems with electricity now for months and months, if not years, because of their just they don't take care of things. All their money goes to terror. All their money goes to terror. No money goes to upkeep. No money goes toward their own people. In fact, they were, like I said, they slaughtered easily over 40,000 Iranians over a couple of days back in January. In the meantime, now Israel and the United States are every day bombarding and just, plagues of bombardment and not firstborn, but top echelon of government and military and nuclear scientists have been wiped out. So we have this situation where their country is getting destroyed, but what's remaining of their leadership says, we're winning. We're not going away. We're not going to give up. We're not giving in. They're exhibiting the exact same hard-headedness that Pharaoh did. God said, I will make his heart heavy. And that's what's happening. They are refusing to give in, even though it's destroying them. And in fact, there's a president now who became president after the other president was killed, who is begging the military leadership to come to a truce with the United States. He said, financially, everything, we're just going to collapse in weeks if we don't do that. Just like at one point, we read in the book of Exodus that Pharaoh's advisors also went to him and say, enough is enough. Just let them go. Give them their freedom. We're being crushed. We're being destroyed. But Pharaoh said no. And the leadership of Iran, whoever they are, is saying no. And another fascinating thing, if you happen to be, getting your news from the New York Times, CNN, I don't know who else. I'm not that up on the foreign media, but I do know that they're telling people that the United States and Israel are failing in this mission, and that Iran is actually, winning the war somehow. And a lot of people are getting that information. It's completely false. Okay, there's a lot of propaganda in war, and yes, I'm also have to sift through propaganda that I get about successes and everything, but with a little bit of sophistication and a broad search through news sources and even personal news sources, you get a pretty accurate description. And when the United States and Israel have had complete air control over Iran for a month now, and every night they're bombing things, of course Iran's getting destroyed. It's a big country. It takes a long time to destroy everything, but of course it's getting crushed. But my suspicion is that the Iranians, not only do they put out their own propaganda in order to convince, maybe they think they're convincing other people, but they're mostly convincing themselves that they're winning, but I'm sure they also read the New York Times and CNN, and they see protests in the United States of, whack jobs who are protesting on behalf of the Iranian regime. They probably also get the idea that, well, maybe we can hold out. Maybe we are winning. Maybe it's not as bad as, so these people that are so wholeheartedly supporting this corrupt, disgusting, vile, sick regime are actually helping to crush it by giving it hope that they're actually not losing the war. So it's a very, very fascinating situation. And again, ultimately, it's true that the Iranians already did rise up once and exhibited tremendous, not just once, they've exhibited tremendous courage, but they're going to have to do it again, which is, what Netanyahu has said many times and what President Trump has said many times. This is not a war for regime change, but hopefully one result of the war will be to create an opening for the people to rise up, for the people to, so to speak, go out and grab a lamb, and on the 14th to slaughter it in front of the Iranian regime, to basically slaughter all that's sacred to this regime in their faces and show the regime that they're not afraid. And once you're not afraid, you can't be stopped. Once you're not afraid, you can't be gunned down, because there's more of you than there are of them. And that will be the big test. And God willing, for the sake of the Iranian people and for the sake of Israel, who has a big stake in this, because their freedom will be our freedom as well, and for the sake of the entire world, whether they know it or not, when this regime goes down, and it will go down, the world will be a better place for it, and a safer place for it, and freedom will ring. Freedom will ring. And if a open, Western-leaning Persian society, Persian government takes over and brings that nation back into modernity and back into the family of nations, it will be a huge blessing for everyone on earth, a huge blessing for all of us here in the Middle East, that's for sure, but a huge blessing for the entire world, and for America, and for Europe, and for Asia, and for all but perhaps Russia and China and North Korea, and I guess Cuba. But, if you're one of those people out in the streets, and a No Kings protest party, you might find yourself on the wrong side of history, because one way or another, these regimes are going down. They always do. They always do. And usually it's their own hubris and their own stubbornness and their own overreach that brings them down. And that's what's happening here. If this were a sane regime, and they didn't have, if their whole raison d'etre, the whole reason for being wasn't in order to take over the world, have a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate in the entire world, and have Sharia law in the entire world, and have total control and enslave the entire world, they wouldn't be there. That's their whole purpose. So once if they do try to come to a compromise with Trump, it means they're basically going to be denying their own reason for being and basically slitting their own wrists. So one way or another, they're going down. It may be a matter of time. It may be quick. It may take a longer time, but they're getting dumped in the garbage. That's for sure. And, it's inevitable, just like it was inevitable in Egypt. When, once Hashem told Moshe to go back to Egypt and confront Pharaoh, it was a done deal. Pharaoh could try to, just like Iran, again, Pharaoh would say, okay, I'll let you go, and then the next minute, no, I'm not going to let you go. Just like with the Iranians, let's sit, let's talk, let's compromise, let's make a deal. And of course, when they do that, they hem and they haw, and they basically, string the other side out, which they've done so many times with so many American administrations. But again, Trump is, he doesn't have the patience for that, and he knows what he wants to do. He's been talking about it for decades. The people who say, well, this is not what I voted for, this is what you voted for. He's been saying for decades before he even ran for president that this is what America's response to Iran needs to be. Anyway, I just find it very fascinating that as we are about to celebrate the Passover, we're witnessing a very similar, a very parallel event today. And again, you can say, okay, well, they're like God, God was out there in the open playing a big role. You know what? Pharaoh didn't see it that way. He said, there is no such thing. I don't know this God. There is no such thing. So things are happening. So, the water turns, so I can make the water turn to blood. Or so we have lice. Okay, that's really nasty. Make them go away. If you want to see miracles, if you want to see God's presence in everyday life and in what's happening and historical events happening all around us, you have to open your eyes. You have to open your heart. You have to stop assuming that everything just happens, or that giving something a scientific or a rational explanation does not necessarily take away from the miraculous nature of that event. The sun comes up every morning, or actually it doesn't come up. We say it comes up, right? The sun's there. It's a fact. It's a fact of nature. Scientists can explain it. Every morning when you get up and the sun's shining, it's a miracle. I'm sorry. Okay, that's one example. But another example is, you can come up and scientists do, what might have transpired, why the Sea of Reeds split, why, there was a tidal wave because there had been a major volcanic or submarine earthquake or something in the Mediterranean. It caused a tsunami, and at that moment it caused the sea to split, and just enough time for the Israelites to get across, but then to close in on the pursuing Egyptians. You can explain it away. Maybe it was a natural event, but timing? It happened at that moment. It happened at that moment that Israel needed it to happen. It happened at that moment that Israel was cornered and had no place to go, and Hashem said, stand back. This is going to happen. And again, Israel had to show the courage of walking into the sea. That's a miracle. Miracles, there's always timing involved in miracles. So that's what we're seeing today. There is so much timing. Everything that's transpired here in Israel since October 7th, 2023, that horrible, cursed day when thousands of Palestinians invaded Israel from Gaza and slaughtered and murdered thousands of innocent men, women, and children here in Israel. Everything that's happened since that day has been miraculous. Israel was at the very bottom. That day was the worst day in the history of Israel, and since then we have risen up, we have fought back, and fighting back with all our hearts. It's like that mincha offering that Hashem wants, giving everything we have. When you do that, God says, I want some of this too. And God makes things happen. When you make things happen, when you push to make things happen, God makes things happen. You push on that door with the right intent, with the right intention, God's going to open it for you. But if you stand there and say, God, open the door for me, good luck with that. This is freedom. This is freedom. And again, like I say, freedom is not, leave me alone. I want to do what I want to do. I don't have any obligations. No, freedom requires obligations. Without obligations, you don't have freedom. And that's why our Torah emphasizes obligations, because the obligations is really the key to freedom. Too many people think that, United States, for example, it's a free society. You're guaranteed your freedom, your rights, and it just means you can do what you want. You don't have to, you owe no one nothing. It's not that way at all. You owe everybody everything. You owe to everyone to be a good person, to treat them decently, to treat them properly, to reach out to them, to help them when they need it. And when you do that, when you're that person, you become free. Thank you so much for being with me, and I wish everybody a very, very happy, a very, very kosher, and a very, very full of freedom Passover holiday, kasher, Pesach, kasher, sameach, v'cherut, freedom to everyone. Thanks for being with me. Temple Talk.